Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Birds of Prey, that goes out of its way to have a huge elongated name that I'm not going to say all of that. But yeah, so Birds of Prey 2020, or Birds of Prey, whatever freaking equivalent this movie is, to eventually be a trending thing. Like, I don't quite understand like why this movie had to come with that like absurd title, because someone has to actually search for that, and then it just becomes like there's several different ways and wrongs eventually of like figuring or finding this movie freaking somewhere. And so I think they just end up calling it, I think, Birds of Prey, I hope, because good god. uh but yeah, so I went into this movie and I rewatched it, and like, I think overall I still have problems with this movie. Like, I have to, just because, like, to me, like, I still have a problem with this being like a movie that obviously feels choreographed. Like, it feels like there are like blatant spots in this movie where like everything has to be choreographed to the T, especially when we get the whole hands thing in the actual like funhouse part of the booby trap thing, the booby trap place. But yeah, you really, like, there is some interesting things going on in this movie. But also, like, I'm just kind of baffled or confused how, like, the Gotham PD is just completely defenseless with one woman with a grenade launcher. And but also the fact that, like, there have been like Batman, Bruce Wayne, whatever, like Ben Affleck Batman had been in a number of other projects, but this one he was kind of conveniently not a part of. When reasonably, I would just think that at some point, like, he would have been in at least one of these scenes somewhere, but I guess not. Just to like just to kind of rationale the fact that Batman does exist in this world, because it is Gotham. And like, I guess Harley is just so small potatoes that Batman couldn't bother to like take the time to go after Harley Quinn, because she's just a less than, I guess. That Batman couldn't, like, so he could go after Deadshot, he could go after Joker, but Harley Quinn is just like, who? Like, so Batfleck is just like not gonna go and be involved in a movie of this, which, okay, sure. Um, when even though it's in Gotham, so but yeah, so I would say that this movie is just like, it's an okay film. Like, I say overall, people are gonna watch this kind of regardless because of the Suicide Squad being out. So more than likely, they're going to watch this regardless. Uh, just to, because eventually I'm sure there's some kind of tie in to either both the original Suicide Squad movie or this, because continuity, I hope. But yeah, so if anything, the thing that I don't enjoy about this movie is it kind of feels like we don't have a care in the world about like outfits or like uniforms or whatever in this movie. Like, Harley Quinn is just tossing on whatever to go and fight crime. Like, we have people that are kind of iconically known as like certain characters, and they don't seem to really have like a uniform, or they're just kind of like, nah, like, that isn't a real true focus in this movie. It's just basically like, you wouldn't know who the Black Canary is until the very end of this film. Uh, because if, especially you're a comic book reader, you wouldn't know who people are, even though they could say who they are. Like, to me, I'm like, okay, this is their version of this character, but I just don't enjoy this version of this character. Like, honestly, Roman Sionis, who is Black Mask, I'm just kind of like, I hate this character. When looking at the Black Mask version of Under the Red Hood, I enjoy that Black Mask. When I come in here and watch this movie, I'm just kind of like, what is this guy? Like, a guy who is a germaphobe, or is just like, how can someone like get behind this villain, like, it's kind of cool eventually, like, when we get to the tail end of this character towards the end of the movie, because that's basically always the thing with this movie. It's like, hey, I like everything that happens in the end, but kind of just the way that we get there is just like, yeah, it's just like, it has a very good beginning. I would honestly say, like, the beginning does win me over. We'll say that. And then, like, the end does kind of give me some things of just going, oh, okay, good. Like, they actually did this route. They went this way. Good for them. But, like, all of that middle part is either just a lot of just, like, eating up of time, or it's just like a thing where I'm just like, why did we have to do all this? Plus, also, like, there is some kind of jumping around of story where all of a sudden they, like, start this story and then they have to stop and they have to go back a certain time and go into something, which I'm like, man, that's gonna get me all, like, jumbled up to forget, like, the first half of this movie and like, because I'm just gonna get freaking confused because I like a complete story, not one thing where I have to all of a sudden go and go, like, wait a minute, now, like, there's one part of this story that kind of f's everything up, and I would just like it to all be one fluid story, but instead, like, we have it to where, of course, Harley Quinn is like, well, this is my story and this is how I'm telling it, kind of thing. So, but yeah, so I honestly could still say that I just don't like the animated sequence in the beginning of this film. In all brutal honesty, like, just because it just either feels like cheap, or like like it kind of makes you want to just say, like, well, why don't I just go into the animated series and just watch that instead and just have some enjoyment and some fun of that. Uh, because really, we're gonna, like, probably get a much more better origin story technically in that thing rather than this, which technically that's what that does. It tells a better origin story than this movie does. Um, but yeah, like, plus also I was waiting for there to be more, like, projects like this where eventually they would go into, like, some solo things. Like, maybe we would have, like a Bloodshot solo movie, or we would, like, start to see stuff, like, come away from that Suicide Squad stuff, like, that really sold that movie, and we would do individual movies of this. But no, we just did the Harley Quinn story, which is basically just Birds of Prey. It's kind of being masked as Birds of Prey, when really it's just like, there are very few times where Birds of Prey is actually in this movie, or, like, for the most iconic Birds of Prey, they just kind of just mangle whatever just people in here and just say, oh, those are the Birds of Prey. Okay, all right. Um, but yeah, but I would say overall, this is a, like, I would have to forcibly say that this is a good enough movie. Just good enough. Like, not as good as the Suicide Squad, because the Suicide Squad does a lot of, like, visually interesting things that I just thoroughly enjoy that film. There is a consistent group effort throughout the whole thing, even though there are separate stories or whatever, like, and there is certain people that have to get their, like, time in the sun, let's just say, with that film. But that doesn't overall hurt the fact that, like, yeah, it has a goofy villain, but at least that villain is better than this villain in this movie, because this villain seems non-existent, or a villain that I'm just like, what is the point of this villain in this movie? There is no point. You can honestly say that Harley Quinn is technically more of a villain in this movie than the Black Mask is, because, like, he's a non-existent character. He's just a person that owns a bar, and that's about it. That's all he really does in this entire film. And then you just have this ending sequence of him just eventually putting on this mask and doing his job, and but there's also just, like, parts of that where I could probably just complain about that. But, like, a solid, I would say a good movie. Probably, I think if I probably watched this originally, I would say that this, like, I think the first time I ever saw this movie, I would say that this is an awful film. So this is kind of an improvement, I guess. Multiple times watching this movie, or just having a lot of other superhero stuff be complete and utter garbage in the passing of time, would just say that, like, you know what, like a good film, at least, or at best, a good film compared to quite possibly some other things here and there. Um, but anyways, so let's just get into this. Let's go into spoilers because this is in like an hour and 40 some odd minute movie. So let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we can do spoil this movie. So really at the beginning of this movie, we have to tell Harley Quinn's origin story, where it's done in, of course, in an animated way. Because if they can't have Jared Leto Joker in this movie, they might as well have just, like, let's just have an animated sequence to justify the Joker relationship. Basically, this whole entire animated sequence, I think, is just to, like, they tried to do a different kind of Joker, but, like, to try to get away from the Jared Leto Joker. Like, you only see Joker from, like, the back of his head at some point in this movie when Harley Quinn is getting kicked out of this house. But anyways, so the very beginning of this story is to showcase that Harley Quinn had a, I guess, a bad family life, to where eventually this dad was just kicking this girl off to live in some, like, halfway house or orphanage or whatever that was to be, had these Catholic nuns kind of giving this girl the what for, kind of spanking her whenever she would get out of place and whatever. So eventually Harley Quinn eventually tied herself, or tag teamed herself on with the Joker, because eventually Harley Quinn had spent numerous times in Arkham Asylum being a therapist, trying to get a combination of certain kind of relationships that all didn't work out. Like, I guess one of them would have been Poison Ivy, and that didn't work out. So Harley Quinzel eventually mixed herself up with the Joker, and eventually we uh, see that eventually Harley was dipped into the ace chemical acid, turned into the, of course, jesterish Harley Quinn, but eventually went on her own to eventually just break up with the Joker for whatever the heck reasons that they just want to just do for here. Like, but it seems that Harley didn't tell everybody about this breakup, and so really some people are just thinking that Harley and the Joker are still a couple, but actually they're not. Because she is to not say that both her and the Joker have broken up, so that way she can protect herself. Because if anybody is going to go after her, they're thinking, oh, the Joker is still got, like, his hand in her, so, like, she's protected by the Joker. But so that kind of like pushes us on to showcasing the Black Mask, who is supposed to be the main villain of this movie. So we have Black Mask, who is going and having 3 people hung upside down, and we have a guy named Victor Zaz, who is to, like, be like Black Mask's henchman. I guess it's rare that we are to actually see Roman Sionis actually be wearing the actual black mask. I guess that's only for real, like, action-packed sequences, I guess. Or just him to just show in the very beginning of this what he looks like with a black mask on. But what ends up happening is we end up having Black Mask, or Roman, having these 3 people hanging, and one of them is to be Mr. Keo. And of course they're going to kill this guy, but it seems they were going to let one of the family members free up until one girl has a freaking boogie in her nose. And so Roman is like, no, like, I'm going to regret that. Kill everyone. So that is to showcase the Black Mask and his supposed origin stories and all that stuff. And eventually we'll get into showing Mr. Keo again at some point in this movie, because they have to show two different stories kind of commingled with one another. So uh, now we are to have Harley Quinn go and do one of her other loves of her life with it, which is some bizarre egg sandwich. And so we have to take the time and really have like a showcasing of this whole like egg sandwich like being cooked, which I'm like, I hate this scene. Like this scene is just like a milking out for time because they have to show the whole process of this whole egg sandwich thing. And eventually we just use this as a thing to like just be a waste of time eventually somewhere down the line to have this and have this exist in our life. But eventually towards the end of the film we kind of have this whole egg sandwich thing again, so like it just comes back around. So but yeah, so what ends up happening is uh we have this scene with like let's go into like the Montoya stuff. So Montoya is supposedly to be this like stereotypical like 80s detective that is to eventually go into a crime scene where there had been a bunch of guys killed all in one like shot of things. And so it seems that every time that Montoya is to do something and solve something, her other partner, her other male partner, I guess, gets the credit for everything. And that's going to happen throughout every single one of like Montoya's crimes that she has to solve. The other male partner is to get the credit for all of it. So Montoya is to figure out that all of these guys that are sitting in this restaurant were all to be killed by one person. And eventually there was one person that was to be left to be killed last and was supposed to get an arrow through the neck. And so that, of course, was the Huntress, which it'll take us forever to actually get the Huntress and her backstory in this movie, which I'm completely fine with because the Huntress is actually like a really cool part of this film compared to everyone else, which kind of feels just like a lame duck in all honesty, just because they're just kind of there. But like the Huntress actually does cool things in this movie. Let's say that. So the Huntress goes through and like, because Montoya is going through the flashback of like showing how exactly the Huntress killed everyone. And so the Huntress is to eventually shoot down a couple of guys, but then eventually leave one guy to get an arrow through the neck. And because the Huntress is out to get certain people who had been involved in her family's death, which eventually we'll get into that when we get into the Huntress. So, and so what eventually ends up happening is we have easily Montoya, who is to realize, because what ends up happening is Harley Quinn goes and is to be in this like roller derby team, and she ends up going to a bar that is co-owned by Black Mask, and so to celebrate, I guess, their win. And so eventually she decides, after she gets drunk enough, that she wants to go and blow up Ace Chemicals to prove the fact that her and Joker are really and truly over. Which leads Montoya to eventually go to Ace Chemicals and realize that it is blown up, and to realize that, like, oh, well, like Harley Quinn and Joker are obviously, like, broken up, because look at this necklace that one guy had found. Like, obviously Harley Quinn had just, because of her necklace being here, obviously Harley Quinn had taken out Ace Chemicals. Like, it could be a billion other freaking people in the world, but because of a necklace laying there, Harley Quinn had to do this. Like, is there fingerprints anywhere that also says Harley Quinn? Like, no? Well, like, also, we had, like, the Ace chemicals that bizarrely exploded into, like, a fireworks display, which I was just kind of like, okay, that looks kind of cool. That looks fun. Um, but, like, it also just kind of looks kind of like, why fireworks? Like, is that what she had on her? Anyways, is Ace Chemicals a co-owned fireworks thing? Like, I just don't quite get that, how it exploded perfectly into fireworks form. But I guess with really Harley Quinn, you always have to go in a very colorful display of stuff that's obvious through this film. So especially once we get through the like the rubber bullet like grenade launcher thing when we get into this movie. So uh so now that perfectly, I think, sets us up to now like get into the whole like chase scene that is to eventually happen here. I had to do a lot of setup for that, and I apologize how it seemed like I had to go in a roundabout way of this movie, but like I forgot about like the whole like stretch of thing that I had to go into before I could kind of perfectly land right where we're at. Because eventually we're gonna have to transition back into another whole scene because there's so much crap to just digest in this movie. But anyways, so let's go on. So Harley is to go and get her egg sandwich. She's gonna try and go try to eat some of that, and all of a sudden Montoya is to appear out of the lick of anywhere and chase after Harley. All of a sudden we have Harley who is eventually stopping for some kind of like little like God, what are they called? Like little bag that goes over your waist. I don't remember what it's called. But she ends up like stopping for that, like, hey, this looks cool, and then she ends up like running off, which I thought was goofy. So we also had Harley Quinn, who ended up going to this pet shop, this pet store, at the very beginning of this to eventually kind of need a coping mechanism for like leaving the Joker, and so she ends up buying a hyena, and she ends up having the hyena like eating the pet shop owner, which is I guess a guy named Murray, because eventually that'll come up here. So now that we got all that out of the way, Harley is now being chased by Montoya, and all of a sudden we start to see a lot of the things come up. We have this roller dummy from the Roller Derby League who ended up getting her nose broken by Harley Quinn. We end up having a guy who ends up having this vehicle, this kind of like van of sorts, that is to be Murray, who is to be upset because his brother had been killed by that hyena because of Harley Quinn. Like all these people end up one way or another trying to get at Harley while she's being chased by Montoya. Like the roller derby girl drops an air conditioning unit on her, or tries to. Murray tries to run her over. We have Roman Sionis's driver who ends up trying to kill Harley because when Harley Quinn was at this club, she ends up breaking both of these guys' legs, because basically this driver was technically being rude to Harley, and so Harley broke both of this guy's legs, which drives Black Mass to say, okay, Zaz, you need to give me a new driver. And eventually that driver eventually becomes Black Canary in this movie. So, and eventually Harley Quinn, still while being chased, eventually goes and meets a guy named Happy, who ended up having to get his face tattooed to look like a clown because of Harley Quinn. And so luckily enough, we had Huntress, who ends up shooting this guy named Happy in the neck, killing him. So what eventually ends up happening is Harley ends up eventually like having this like perfect choreographed plan to chuck all this trash at Montoya and at the Sionis' driver, and eventually, like also onto Murray's car, and so we eventually have like just Harley getting away from all this and like kind of just disappearing without anybody noticing. So Montoya is to go back to the precinct in just utter defeat because she doesn't have Harley Quinn with her. And so Montoya is to eventually go and spot Cassandra Cain. And so Montoya is just like, hey, what are you doing here? And I guess Cassandra Cain is known for not saying anything, but I guess they're doing that as a joke in this movie to just be like, no, she's gonna have lines. Like, believe me, everyone is going to. So Cassandra is to tell Montoya that she smells like crap, and so that leads Montoya to just get an exchange of clothes that ends up saying like, uh, "I shaved my balls for this." So uh, she ends up going and talking to Captain Patrick, who is to like tell her about like, hey, we have dress code here, and like kind of giving her crap because like basically how like her partner keeps getting credit for everything and bop 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 bop. Like it's a bunch of just garbagey, nonsensical, whatever. Like it's just a blah. So, but anyways, so what ends up happening is Montoya is to get a call from Black Canary consistently while Montoya is getting chewed out by her boss. And so Montoya is to go and answer her phone, and it's Black Canary mentioning that uh, Cassandra Cain is to have this diamond, and the Black Mask is after it, and so on and so forth. And so that leads us to a kind of a flashback. So now we have to showcase like back to the Black Mask's bar. So we find that the Black Canary is to be a singer at this bar, and so now like we have like Harley Quinn and Black Canary at this bar, and like Harley's mentioning how like she's all by herself and how it's great, as you can see tears rolling down her eyes. And so and she's back in her like her bar attire as well from the flashback from before when she broke both a guy's legs. So what ends up happening is that Harley ends up getting too drunk at this bar, so much so that a guy is to almost take advantage of her while basically just kind of like dancing with her outside this bar, just like having this guy really realize how he can really just like do whatever with this girl. And so it seems like this guy is going to take Harley to eventually go into this van. And so we have Black Canary who's kind of seeing this happen and decides that the Black Canary is going to come to Harley Quinn's defense. Starts beating up a bunch of these guys, and all of a sudden the Black Mask is to spot this out his window and mention to Zaz like, hey, like I guess this Black Canary can do a little bit more than sing really well, I guess. So like maybe we'll have her on as the new driver, because considering Black Mask is looking for a new driver anyways. Uh, so that leads us to eventually have Canary like going to or wait. So Zaz is to tell Canary that she's the new driver, as Canary is kind of driving Harley to like a kind of place where she can kind of just cure her hangover with, I guess, an egg sandwich. And so Canary is to eventually go to her apartment building, where eventually she's going to see Cassandra Cain, who is to eventually just be at this stairwell. And Canary is to eventually go and talk with Montoya and talk about how Canary's mother is dead because of like helping out Montoya and her people. Because I guess uh, like Montoya's mom might have been like a rat or a squealer for that family, and that ended up having her just dead for all of that. So, uh, so eventually we pull off from that to have Victor Zaz, who is to have the diamond that everybody's going to eventually be scrambling for, and uh, so Cassandra Cain is to consistently just pick the pocket of everybody in town, and like so this is kind of like a preview or a prequel of what eventually happens with Cassandra Cain, who ends up in this prison. But there's like the or Gotham PD, but there's a whole reason for that. Let me pause here for a second so I can reset. Because basically we get to a moment where Harley Quinn is like bashing her way through this entire like police department and asking for Cassandra Cain, and that does a whole reset to where we have to showcase how like Cassandra Cain got to get this diamond and how everybody is wanting it. So Cain is to pickpocket Zaz's pockets to just find this diamond. And so, like, Cain even tries to pickpocket, like, the Canary, and Canary won't let her do that. It's like, hey, man, like, you can't just pick anybody's pockets. Like, it's not going to work out that way. Because some people are going to be smart about it. So eventually, Cain does get arrested, and that just lands her to eventually swallow the diamond. And all of a sudden, Cass is checking his pockets to realize that the diamond is gone. And so now, eventually, like Roman has to tell like Black Mask that, hey, yeah, the diamond is gone, and this girl is to have it. Uh, so what eventually ends up happening is the Black Mask is to eventually go and take Harley Quinn, like grab her, nab her. And so what ends up happening is that Harley is to make a deal that because she's like a mercenary or she's a hit woman or she's like some other kind of thing, because Black Mask is wanting to kill Harley because really like obviously he's like one that's like, oh well, she's no longer with the Joker, like now she's going to be dead, because it seems like there's a lot of people that want her dead, and I could be one of them for any number of reasons that Harley's to make up at whatever second, because there's a ton of reasons. So Harley is to make a deal with the Black Mask to just be like, well, how about this? Like, because Harley had heard uh, between the Black Mask and Zaz that they need to get this girl, and so Harley's like, yeah, I'm your woman. Like, I can go and get this for you, and like retrieve this diamond, whatever you want. Like, I can get it for you. And so Black Mask is like, okay, sure. Like, like I guess if she doesn't get it, then we can just kill her. And like, so either way, if she gets us the diamond, we could probably still kill her anyways. So, but that just leads to eventually Harley bizarrely having this Madonna moment where all of a sudden she's singing like "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend" and going into this very old-fashioned like song and dance. And I'm just like, why do we need this in this movie? Like, I guess to just have this old-fashioned dance sequence, but I'm just like, okay, just like a random scene of, I guess, like something that pops in this girl's head as she's technically getting tortured. Like we also had Harley Quinn, that is to mention like everything that that Roman is eventually going to tell her, and I thought that that sequence was kind of funny. But anyways, so uh, that leads us to now have Harley Quinn making her way through Gotham PD with just a grenade launcher in hand and just like bashing through every police officer so easily and quickly with just like rubber bullets, I guess, and just clocking through all these people with kind of this paint kind of spray through everywhere. So uh, eventually, Harley is to eventually get to where all the prisoners are being held, and so she ends up like breaking like the whole like mechanism to eventually like open every single cell of all these cells. She also is to malfunction the sprinkler system. So here's when we have a severely choreographed fight scene that is to go on into this prison or this little jail cell. And but we eventually have Kane getting out, and so Harley is trying to protect Kane because eventually Black Mask had made a warrant out uh, for Cassandra Kane, and so everyone is going after her besides Harley. So, anyways, uh, like Harley just goes and bashes through all these people in this jail cell, and so she ends up going into this evidence room, which even more choreographed fight scenes are to be had there. And we have these guys called the Gotham City Hunters, which is just basically some motorcycle gang with a bunch of machine guns and whichever, just kind of your severely generic, like, hey, these guys need to be beat up by someone, and it has to be Harley Quinn. So these Gotham City Hunters just easily make their way through Gotham City PD because, like, I guess people weren't expecting a whole entire army of guys to go through Gotham City PD and just blow it up. So, well, technically just shoot it up, not blow it up. So, the Gotham City Hunters are making their way to the evidence room as well because I guess they figure Kane is in the evidence room because whatever reason. So, Harley has to go and ricochet a bat on one of these guys, which I was like, that is such a goofy, I wonder how many times that they probably choreographed the whole, like, ricochet bat thing. Did they CGI it, or did they actually do the effect, like, multiple times? But anyway, they, like, choreographed the heck out of this scene. There's parts where, like, Harley's getting, like, tossed into a convenient opened car door, and there's just a lot of sequences that just feel way too like just I'm like, let's get past this. So Harley is eventually like run out of things to be able to hurt these people with, so eventually she ends up grabbing a lighter that Kane gives her to burn this one guy's beard. And so what ends up happening at the very tail end of this is Montoya is to show up to try to prevent Harley from leaving this evidence room. And so Harley just goes and takes this cell phone and kicks it into, like, basically, like, Harley kicks it and then the cell phone hits Montoya's head and she goes backwards. And I'm just like, okay, like, man, that really must have like really hurt, just getting a cell phone like perfectly, like, just like right this into the face. Like if it was like this, like I could see how that could have like this, like solid like this, that would have actually hurt, not like this in the face. That wouldn't really garner somebody getting completely knocked out, but whatever. So uh but again, perfectly choreographed. So Harley is to uh, eventually take Kane on this seemingly little tiny bit of road trip And there is to be some bizarre like random person that is going to go and be like angry at Harley, and so Harley gives Kane this thing of dynamite to toss in this girl's car to kill her off. So Harley then goes shopping, and Harley's buying a bunch of laxatives or a bunch of stuff that is going to destroy this girl's stomach because she has to get this diamond out of her system. And so Harley's getting another bunch of also like things that Harley wants, and she's just going to eventually shoplift all of these things because Harley has no money. So we had this interesting sequence where one guy is to conveniently stop Harley from like running off with this food, and he ends up freaking getting bashed with his cart. He falls over, and then they get out of the cart. They get out of the store. So, and that transitions Harley to make it to a restaurant that is to have a guy named Doc there, and evidently this is Harley Quinn's favorite restaurant. Plus, I guess she has a like an apartment upstairs. Evidently, Harley Quinn orders the number 32 because it's like a thing that has like is covered with hot sauce, so you can't tell like the awful cooking that this guy has to do. And evidently, that's like everyone's favorite dish because they're just like, dude, like this guy is awful cooking, and so we might as well mask it with some kind of like hot sauce or whatever. So that pushes us on to have Harley going up into her little like room that is to showcase that this hyena's name is Bruce because it's named after Bruce Wayne, and that there's some weird looking beaver that Harley used to have, and so on and so forth. So the Huntress is to enter this restaurant and order the exact same dish that Harley Quinn had, and so now we have the Huntress who is like talking to Doc in a different language. And so once Doc is to ask what this woman's name is, all of a sudden we have the Huntress who ends up trying to say what her name is. But Harley is to, of course, cut her off because now we have to go into the entire origin story of the Huntress. So we find out that the Huntress family evidently had like this mob boss was the Huntress's father, and so eventually, when the Huntress is to go home one day as a young girl, there is to be a guy named Stefano Galante. I'm probably ill pronouncing that. That is to decide that he wants all of the Huntress's family to be killed off. So that forces us to have one of Stefano's gang members decide that he ends up seeing that the Huntress woman is still alive, so he takes her and has her practice for years on end to become like the perfect assassin, so she can come back one day and get revenge on the family who had killed her family. So we cover the whole Huntress stuff, so let's get back into Black Mask, who's at his bar, and he's to eventually find out some bad news, and that all of a sudden causes him to all of a sudden some woman having this bizarre maniacal laugh, that he is to all of a sudden assume that like she is laughing at him. And so Black Mask makes an example of this woman for I don't know what reason, and so he decides to force her to get up on this table and have her boyfriend like rip the dress off her because this dress looks awful. I can make that same exact sentiment, but it seems like everyone who is to be in this movie wears awful clothes because it just kind of feels like they just weirdly hit some weird kind of design of color of whatever in this movie, and they just went with it. But hey, like I wear odd clothes too, so like that's just the way we do things. So in my world. So we transition back to Harley Quinn, and so it seems like people are going and trying, like the police are going and trying to find Harley, and all of a sudden we eventually see some random guy who is to have some grievance with Harley that ends up like uh, tossing an explosive into Harley Quinn's home, and so all of a sudden her place blows up. And so Harley Quinn is to go back down to eventually find out that Doc had sold her out. And that, like, Doc is getting so much money from, like, random people to get information about Harley. And so Doc, even, like, Harley's best friend, is just going to sell her down the well. Isn't that sad? Everyone cry during this moment. Everyone cry. So, everyone just started crying! Every part of this movie, just start bawling your eyes out. I feel so bad for Harley Quinn. Hopefully she'll get a franchise movie that keeps putting her up with teams and like, oh, that happens. So. Harley just decides that since everyone has just turned against her, Harley is just to decide to turn against the one person that she has been technically teaming up with for how many number of minutes in this movie. So Harley is to go and make a call to the Black Mask to say, hey, like, I have Cassandra Cain. I'm going to, like, turn her in. And so, like, come and meet me at the booby trap. Like, eventually I'll give you, like, I'll hand off this girl and everything will go swimmingly, I'm sure. Like, I'm sure you're not going to go and try to kill me off, right, Black Mask? So, so what ends up happening is the Black Mask is just like, oh, okay, well, Black Canary and Zaz, you go there, and then Black Mask decides that he's gonna go there as well to have his little masked minions that eventually, like, because there's one spot where Black Canary and the Black Mask, like, he's showing her all his like his little shrunken heads and his like bizarre collection of statues and weird looking stuff that is to waste time for Zaz to eventually consistently uh mention about Harley Quinn and what she's doing, which forces eventually the Black Mask to go and go after Harley Quinn in flashback form. So because I'm gonna who cares about Black Canary eventually being Black Mask's like kind of driver. That whole sequence is just kind of like Black Canary is just an attractive woman, yes, but like, is she important in this movie? No. So so Black Canary and Zaz are making their way to going to the booby trap, and there is to be a text, obviously for everyone to see in the world, where there is some unknown person saying, I'll meet you there. And Zaz obviously sees that. And so Zaz is like, well, hey, I need to go and take a pee. I need to tinkle. I need to do the number deuce. And so Zaz goes to some bathroom to call Black Mask and say, hey, like, your woman is a rat. Like, if anything, like, she's obviously like turned on you, so you should probably come down here and kill her yourself. So, that leads us to have Harley at the booby trap, and so Harley is now duct taped Crane to the turlet, and like, she's kind of like taping her as much as humanly possible. So coincidentally, we have Montoya, that is like the quickest person in the world to get anywhere, I guess. And so after Harley is to like duct tape Crane to the toilet, she all of a sudden is to be like one-on-one with Montoya. And so we just kind of have this very heavily choreographed fight scene again, because this movie has to do that. And so we kind of cleverly have this like whack-a-mole thing going on with them having to like take down like all of these things to have these like little ding 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 things going on. It's weird. So they kind of tussle through the couch and do all of this rigmarole. And so what eventually ends up happening is Zaz comes on in and goes and tranquilizes Harley Quinn in the neck. And so now we just all of a sudden absurdly have this like gun standoff because Black Canary is going and taking the tape off of Kane, and so that leads all of a sudden everybody to just have a gun and just be like, hey, like you're a bad guy. Hey, you're a bad guy. So what eventually ends up happening is that everybody's just like, you know what, like we're just gonna kill Zaz, and because I think that's the best thing to do, because like Zaz is talking about that he's gonna carve himself up a little slice of heaven with Harley when like Zaz kind of cuts a certain part of his body to like remember the death of Harley when he is to take her, because that's what Zaz does bizarrely. So they just decide, well, like we're just gonna go and just kill Zaz, like kind of like he takes a freaking like arrow to the jugular because like Huntress is trying to like get the whole trifecta of everyone that has wronged her with her family, and so I think Zaz should be the last one left. So Zaz ends up getting killed. We have Harley, who's starting to get feeling back into her arm, that tries to stab Zaz with this tranquilizer, but he's technically already dead. So we see the Black Mask family, or Black Mask army, is starting to form, and so all of a sudden we have Black Mask who puts his Black Mask on, and we just see like all these other minions who also have these like old-fashioned masks that are on them. So that pushes us on to Harley Quinn trying to get weaponry to fight up against this army, and I guess they can't really do that with conveniently a lot of guns. So they eventually just decide to find a lot of props from either the Suicide Squad movie, which is the Daddy's Little Girl shirt, or the baseball bat that is to be from the Suicide Squad film, which I don't even think, like, does Black Canary even use that? I don't even know. Even though she grabs it, I don't think she really uses it. But anyways, like we also have to like everybody consistently keeps calling the Huntress like the crossbow killer, and like the Huntress is like, that's not my name, it's the Huntress. I'm like, oh great. So anyways, pushing on. So after the whole like weapons kind of things are kind of being shelled out to people, Montoya evidently gets this one jester like top. So I guess it's like a bulletproof thing for eventually her to get like shot, because obviously they're gonna kill a cop first, I guess. So after that, Harley Quinn goes through this slip and slide, kind of like little playground slide, to get to some funhouse part uh, of this booby trap location. So that eventually lands us to like have this whole huge, again, choreographed scene where like the only cool part about this whole thing is like the Huntress like going on these tongues and bouncing through these tongues and killing people, and like eventually when they're getting to like the hand parts where everybody's getting their time in the sun, just have like everything perfectly aligned, where like certain like hands are to of course have these specific numbers to help people figure out where the heck that they're supposed to go. They should have honestly kind of cropped that shot so you can actually see the numbers on the hands, because like that would just conveniently say that there has to be a choreographed thing here, and they should not have shown that, but they did, because I guess they didn't care, or they should have edited it out, but whatever. So uh, conveniently, uh, that just leads us to have all the Birds of Prey girls win this whole fight, and that lands them to just decide to open this door to just head on out to what is to be still like the Black Mask army that are holding these things called guns, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, like we did it, and then all of a sudden they're like, pow 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 pow, and like Montoya is to be down and injured, probably broken a rib, and so like she ends up getting shot, but like bulletproof top, so like she's not gonna die. Like they're gonna have her go to the Squeakquel. So what ends up happening is that Black Mask, I guess, considering now that his numbers are dwindling, because Black Canary finally uses her canary cry or her powers finally in this movie to kind of take out quite a few people. We have the Huntress who's actually taking out some men, and so the Black Mask is like, dude, I need to just drive away. Like me and some other car needs to just drive away and try to escape all this because we're outnumbered now. Barely. So here's a bizarre sequence. So we have Harley Quinn, who now has rollerblades on for whatever reason, and Harley Quinn is thinking that she can actually like be able to like beat out a car with rollerblades. And it seems like she's actually doing a pretty decent job. It seems like she's going pretty fast enough to where she's like almost getting to this car. But then all of a sudden the Huntress is just like, hey, you need a hand with me and my motorcycle? And so then Harley Quinn like grabs onto this motorcycle and is to eventually jump onto this car where she's to beat down a couple of Black Mask's minions. But eventually she then has to get to another car that actually has Black Mask and Kane and whoever else. So so Harley eventually goes and is to eventually be on the Huntress's motorcycle again. And so Harley is to supposedly get schlung by the Huntress, and then Huntress ends up like crashing her motorcycle. So Harley ends up going and grabbing onto the bumper of this car. And here's the thing that I don't buy whatsoever at all during the sequence. We see Harley Quinn, who is obviously just kind of like barely holding on to this car. And I'm just like, I don't buy this at all. Like, this sequence obviously feels like heavily like they had to come up with some kind of like. Harley is probably holding on to this car with some kind of like system or whatever, rope or whatever. There's no way you can hang on to this car like the way she's hanging on to it. And like, there's like, there's two, like, ugh, I hate this. So. But anyways, so Harley is to conveniently be able to, like have this car basically crash, and that just heads, Black Mask and Kane onto this place called the Founders Pier. So we have Black Mask who's talking to Harley and basically mentioning how like she'll never be like her own kind of like person. Like eventually she'll need Joker to eventually be like be at her best, because like Black Mask is just like, he's done this for too long and he is probably way better at it than Harley Quinn is, blah 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 blah. Just a bunch of dialogue that is just like a way to just eat up time, because we gotta like take a long stretch of time for Black Mask to be found because they gotta eat up more minutes. I love Ewan McGregor, but good God, is he an awful villain in this movie? So eventually Harley Quinn is to have this like 6-shooter, and she's to kind of see like Black Mask and Kane in the shadows, and eventually like this whole thing is to kind of clear up. Like Harley is to shoot this this sculpture that actually has the Black mask on it. So Harley is to run out of bullets, And so what ends up happening is Black Mask comes out of the shadows with Kane, and eventually what ends up happening is Kane is to eventually have taken like the grenades, and so she ends up pulling a pin out of one of these grenades and kind of tossing it into Black Mask's uh, like pockets or whatever, and so Harley Quinn just goes and tosses Black Mask over this barrier of this pier, and so he ends up going into the water and exploding and dying horrifically. So that is just to lead to them all of a sudden, like the whole birds of prey, if you can call them that, all decide to go on to margaritas, and like they're hoping that Kane eating a big burrito is going to lead her to go and take a crap. And so I guess Harley does eventually get the diamond after all when Kane is to take a huge crap. So what ends up happening is Harley and Kane go off to eventually have this diamond appraised and get a lot of money for this. And so Montoya goes on to quit her job as a police officer because, again, like her partner had gotten all the credit for everything that Montoya did. And it's like, yeah, like he took care of Black Mask. And so Montoya's just like, dude, I'm going to freaking quit. I'm sick of this. And so Montoya goes on to form the Birds of Prey with the Huntress and Black Canary, and so eventually we have this like them trotting out after they beat all these people. They're like trotting out like, my stuff don't stink, and so Harley Quinn goes off to have another egg sandwich with Kane, and so basically they just drive off into the sunset, and uh and so like eventually Harley is just to finish up or wrap up this movie, and so I'm gonna get the heck out of here. But yeah, like an okay overall movie, like almost a good movie. Like I guess I can just give this movie credit for some of the things that it tries, but I also just kind of hate this movie because it doesn't like it kind of makes a lot of characters irrelevant in this film, or kind of like doesn't go the comic book way for a lot of characters, where it just kind of feels like a lot of characters are just like they don't get their time in the sun besides Huntress, besides Harley Quinn, and like Montoya, I guess, for whatever she's here really for. Like, but anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.